will start off with the first speaker, and that is Dr. Adina Kamien-Kazhdan. She is David Rockefeller Curator of the Stella Fishbash Department of Modern Art at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. And she's curator in charge of the Vera and Arturo Schwartz collection of Dada and Surrealist art. And she's currently preparing a manuscript on the collaboration between Marcel Duchamp, Man Ray, and Arturo Schwartz on the replicas of the ready-mades and objects for publication within the Ashgate Studies on Surrealism series. And she will talk here today about remaking the ready-made Marcel Duchamp, Galleria Schwartz, and the conundrum of the replica. Please welcome Dr. Adina Kamien-Kazhdan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here at the Moderna Museet in Stockholm, and I would like to thank Director Daniel Birnbaum, Curator and Research Leader Anna Tellgren, Curator Annika Gunnarsson, Ulva Hillstrom, Curator of Learning, and Conference Assistant Linda Anderson for the opportunity to speak here. I look forward to developing meaningful cooperation between your museum and the Israel Museum, Jerusalem, as we both share a great appreciation for Duchamp, rich collections, and a desire to pursue the Dada spirit. So this is a shot of our gallery of Dada within the Modern Art Gallery. And you can see here that I attempt to emulate the way the artists hung their works in the studios. Here, for example, the urinal of Duchamp is on the lintel in the spirit of Duchamp. So now we go back in time to 1917. And many of Marcel Duchamp's original ready-mades were lost, dismantled, or destroyed. This was due to the artist's emphasis on the creative act rather than its physical permanence, as well as a life characterized by frequent moves or expatriations. By the 1960s, only 7 out of the 14 original ready-mades remained extant. 5 of them donated to the Philadelphia Museum of Art by the artist's lifelong patrons Walter and Louise Arensberg, and 2 bequeathed to the Museum of Modern Art, New York, by Catherine Dreyer, co-founder with Duchamp and Man Ray of the Société Anonyme. This lack was the initial reason and justification for the replication of Duchamp's ready-mades. Replication also provided financial security to both artist and dealer. However, according to Milanese scholar, poet, dealer Arturo Schwartz, Duchamp's motivation to replicate his ready-mades was not pride of authorship, nor the desire to commercially exploit his ideas. Rather, it was his realization that his opus consisted a single continuum. Each item was like a page of a work in progress, and an item isolated from its context would be as obscure as a page torn from a book. This conception of his oeuvre as a coherent whole that should not be dispersed led Duchamp to favor museums as the keepers of his work. Additionally, Duchamp recognized the power of replicas and multiples to convey novel concepts, amplify his reputation, and render his works iconic. He embraced replication to spur rethinking, unhinge original meanings, and blur conventional categories. I will first outline Duchamp's thoughts regarding the ready-made and replication. Then I will proceed chronologically from 1951 through the major replication projects of the 1960s in New York, Stockholm, and Pasadena, building up to my focus on the editioned replicas produced by the Galleria Schwartz in Milan. While treated carelessly at the time of their creation, Duchamp later recognized the ready-made as his most important innovation. It challenged handcrafted standards for art and the notions of taste and aesthetics. The ready-made shook the very definition of art by placing the artist's conceptual process at the center, minimizing the value of the unique original object, as well as the centrality of the artist's manual effort and skill. Replication and appropriation underlie the very concept of the ready-made. By definition, An unassisted ready-made, or the components of an assisted one, already existed in multiple form before it was removed, i.e. appropriated from its functional context and relocated into the art world. If the original artifact were lost or destroyed, the work of art could be easily replaced, i.e. replicated, because it was industrially manufactured in multiple form from the outset. Duchamp's influence on American and European art grew tremendously from the 1950s onwards. His work spoke forcefully to younger artists, reinforcing their attempts to subvert what had come before them. 40 years after its conception, artists associated with pop, nouveau realism, and fluxus favored the ready-made and practiced replication and appropriation. The idea of the replica or edition was not new to Duchamp. To fill gaps in his oeuvre between the 1910s and the 1960s, Duchamp had already legitimized these concepts when he chose to create single replicas of earlier works, small editions of works, or works in multiple. Duchamp's own replication of ready-mades that had been destroyed or lost was probably the key precedent for the later replication of these works by others. As objects were lost or dispersed, Duchamp chose to recreate them as precisely as possible. For example, the first ready-made, the 1913 bicycle wheel, left behind in Paris when Duchamp sailed to New York in 1915, was lost when Duchamp's sister Suzanne cleaned out his studio. Duchamp created a replica of the work in 1915-16 in New York. However, this replica got lost too. Duchamp reconstructed this work again only in 1951. Duchamp found the repetitive nature of the work of his fellow artists the opposite of creativity. Thus, ironically, instead of repeating a certain style, he chose to work in the field of replication. Though replication would confine him inevitably to the narrow spectrum of art that he had already made, Duchamp saw it as the purest way to maintain his artistic integrity. In his talk apropos of ready-mades, delivered at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 1961, Duchamp discussed the question of the replica and its relation to the original. Quote, "I realized very soon the danger of repeating indiscriminately this form of expression and decided to limit the production of ready-mades to a small number yearly. I was aware at the time that for the spectator, even more than for the artist, art is a habit-forming drug, and I wanted to protect my ready-mades against such a contamination. Another aspect of the ready-made is its lack of uniqueness," said Duchamp, "the replica of the ready-made delivering the same message. In fact, nearly every one of the ready-mades existing today is not an original in the conventional sense." Duchamp's 1961 statement blurs the differentiation between original and replica, part of the artist's revolutionary program of challenging concepts of authorship and originality. Between 1951 and 63, Duchamp was involved in exhibitions initiated by Sidney Janis, Ulf Linde, and Walter Hupps, individuals who were central to the promotion of Duchamp's ideas and work internationally, and in some cases authorized replicas they found or constructed. The replicas that existed in 1961 were those created or chosen by Duchamp to replace lost works, or individual replicas chosen by others and then authorized by Duchamp, mainly for exhibition purposes. Harriet and Sidney Janis emphasized the potential multiplicity of the ready-made. They said, "The ready-mades may be unique as a concept, but they are not necessarily intended to be unique and unrepeatable. For example, the bottle rack was lost and replaced by another. Although the original inscription was forgotten and no other substituted, the act of replicating the object itself grants to the product of mass production the same validity as nature grants to any star in the skies or a grain of sand upon the earth." In their text, Marcel Duchamp, Anti-Artist, in the special 1945 Duchamp number of View magazine, the Janises wrote, quote, Duchamp, "I have forced myself to contradict myself in order to avoid conforming to my own taste." Some 20 years later, the artist made a similar remark to Schwartz. You see, I don't want to be pinned down to any position. My position is the lack of a position. But of course, you can't even talk about it. The minute you talk, you spoil the whole game. In 1960, a group of Duchamp's Swedish admirers, including Pontus Hultén, director of the Moderna Museet Stockholm, historian Ulf Lindé, and artist Per-Olof Ultvelt and Magnus Wibom, began working together on replicating Duchamp's ready-mades, the first initiative to construct replica ready-mades. This effort was undertaken on the occasion of a Duchamp exhibition inspired by Robert Lebel's 1959 monograph on the artist. Marcel Duchamp opened in May 1960 at the Bokkonsum bookstore in Stockholm. Lindé, an art critic and advisor to the Moderna Museet, made a miniature model of the large glass and together with artist Per-Olof Ultvelt prepared replicas of Fresh Widow and Bicycle Wheel for the exhibition. Also included in the Bokkonsum show was Bottle Dryer, which artist Daniel Spoeri had purchased at the Bazaar de l'Hôtel de Ville in Paris and lent for the Swedish show. Bottle Dryer was discarded after the show as its size and shape differed greatly from those of the original. Ulf Lindé reported that Duchamp's permission was sought before beginning construction. When I got into my head that I would do an exhibition for him, I wrote and asked if I could do replicas, and he liked the idea very much. I made drawings and went to a factory in Stockholm where many small artisans had their workshops, and I had them made. Lindé attempted to replicate the pieces as meticulously as possible, but he worked solely from photographs in the Lebel monograph and was unable to procure exact materials for bicycle wheel. Despite the differences, at a later date, Duchamp signed and inscribed Lindé's replica of bicycle wheel, pour copie conforme, Marcel, and Fresh Widow was later acknowledged and inscribed certified true copy, recalling formal notarial formulations. The important European exhibition Movement in Art was presented in 1961 at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, at the Moderna Museet, and at the Louisiana Museum in Denmark. The exhibition was organized in Sweden by some of the same people who had begun replicating Duchamp's work a year earlier, including Hultén, Ultvelt, Wibom, and Lindé. For this exhibition, Hultén suggested replicating Duchamp's rotary glass plates, 1920. Ultvelt and Wibom produced this replica based on photographs supplied by Duchamp. The key difference between this replica and the original was that the plates were larger and made of plexiglass rather than the smaller glass plates Duchamp used. Movement in Art also displayed the replicas of the large glass produced by Lindé and Hultén, and Fresh Widow and Bicycle Wheel replicated in 1960 for the Bokkonsum exhibition. Hultén and Daniel Spoeri also made a replica of Door, 11 Rue Larrey, that was destroyed following the closing of the traveling exhibition. When Duchamp came to Stockholm in 1960, he approved a small-scale reproduction of the large glass, which Lindé had by then improved, and after a series of experiments that proved successful, the large glass was produced in full scale. Lindé found it difficult to discern the colors from the Lebel monograph. Thus, Duchamp, over a course of a 10-day stay with Lindé, verified colors and also signed most of the earlier Lindé replicas. Much like the original, the replica large glass was displayed in unfinished form in 1961 at the Moderna Museet in Stockholm, here. That same year, Duchamp was interviewed by writer Alain Jouffroy in New York and asked for his thoughts on reproduction. Duchamp related to the problematic of reproduction in general, commenting specifically and positively on the Stockholm large glass. There is an amusing case exactly in that instance. In Stockholm, there was a recent exhibition dealing with movement, said Duchamp. They would have liked to have brought the large glass from Philadelphia, but it was impossible. It could not be transported. Then Mr. Linde, who is an art critic but not a painter at all, undertook to make an exact copy of the large glass on glass 3 meters high. And then he goes on. He accomplished in 3 months what I had accomplished in 8 years. And I saw it and I thought it was very good because the replica is a replica in the dimensions of the original. And it gives an echo of the real thing. Very close. To the point even that there was no need to reject it. I signed it on the back, an exact copy. Linde recounted that the budget of the movement and art exhibition suffered from financial constraints. Therefore, Duchamp and Man Ray, who also participated in the exhibition, agreed that the museum produce editions to be included in the catalog's deluxe edition, thereby enabling Ulten and Linde to complete the project. This was the origin of Duchamp's Fluttering Heart silk screen edition and an edition of 15 of Man Ray's Obstruction. The Moderna Museet also published a flexi-disc record featuring Duchamp's rotorelief Corel on the front. Duchamp and Man Ray's works were thus concurrently presented as exhibition pieces and as commercial multiples offered for sale. This example demonstrates how Duchamp and Man Ray similarly legitimated the blurring of borders between unique works, editions, and multiples. In 1963, in conjunction with the publication of his monograph on Duchamp, Linde organized a major exhibition of ready-mades in Stockholm at the Galerie Eva af Buren. Linde had received permission from Duchamp to make a series of new replicas for the show based on the Les Belles monograph and on the Boîte en Valise reproductions. Duchamp was quite enthusiastic about the proposal, the first exhibition to concentrate solely on his ready-mades. Quote, "For the show at Mrs. Buren's, I agree thoroughly with your idea to have every ready-made shown in exact replicas. Linde even included an autographed facsimile of Duchamp's response as a checklist for the exhibition. The exhibition also featured 2 1960 replicas of Bicycle Wheel and Fresh Widow that were now signed by Duchamp, and 9 new 1963 replicas. Linde shared his recollections 47 years later. Many of my replicas were not correct, so all my faults are preserved in Schwarz's edition. For instance, Why Not Sneeze Rose C'est la Vie is horrible. It was made in Stockholm before I had ever seen the original from a photo in the Les Belles book. There are some very, very embarrassing mistakes. But Linde corrected some of his errors with a forgiving Duchamp overseeing his efforts. Duchamp said to me that my replicas were not perfect, but you can change them when you see the original. I had a free hand to correct the mistakes, and I did so with almost all the ready-mades in Stockholm, except Fresh Widow, which is 60 meters high, a measurement that was printed in Les Belles' book, but it was really 72 centimeters high. Linde saw the originals only in 1977 when he curated a comprehensive exhibition dedicated to Duchamp at the Centre Pompidou in Paris, together with art critic and historian Jean Clair. The replicated works were ultimately donated to the Moderna Museet in 1965 in accordance with Duchamp's request. It was not my idea to make any money, Linde said. In those days, I didn't care about money. Following the Duchamp exhibition in Stockholm, in 1963, the artist finally had his first retrospective exhibition at the Pasadena Museum of Art in California. Encouraged by Pasadena director Thomas Liavit, curator Walter Hopps played an instrumental role in boosting interest in Duchamp's work. For the exhibition, he collected virtually all of the extant ready-mades from the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the Museum of Modern Art, New York. Haps had initially become familiar with Duchamp's work through the Arensberg family, whose Hollywood home he frequented. Haps was able to obtain many works by Duchamp from collectors all over the world, making the exhibition close to complete. Haps' project gathered many replicas, putting them under one roof for the first time. Linde said that he actively participated in the selection and shipping of his replicated ready-mades to Pasadena. Duchamp himself made the choice that I should send them, Linde said. And here we see a list of the works, the ready-mades in the Pasadena exhibition, and you can see that 6 out of the 13 ready-mades came from Stockholm. The exhibitions and replication project in Stockholm and Pasadena were critical precursors to Arturo Szwarc's activity in Milan, and set the stage for his 1964 Duchamp exhibition and reconstruction of the ready-mades as editions. However, in contrast to earlier replication projects, such as those of Janus, Linde, or Haps, who selected or constructed replicas as single edition copies, Szwarc's project led to the proliferation of the ready-mades and to the creation of a new market. These replicas have found their way into many museums and private collections, becoming stand-ins for the original ready-mades. Duchamp's works and words have persisted in my eyes and inhabited my mind ever since 1942, said Szwarc. I was 18 and just beginning to look at works of art with the stare of Alice in Wonderland, wrote Arturo. His first initiation into Marcel's mysteries was Breton's 1935 essay on Duchamp, Phare de la Mariée. Szwarc was also impressed by a lecture given by the French philosopher and poet Gaston Bachelard, in which he described alchemy as a science for bachelors, for initiates, living isolated from society. That was exactly the case of Duchamp, and it drew me toward him. In the late 1950s and into the 1960s, Duchamp forged a close relationship with Arturo Szwarc. In 1964-65, Szwarc produced editioned replicas of 14 Duchamp ready-mades in close collaboration with the artist. This brought together two central motivating factors for replication: the reconstruction of lost work and the desire to disseminate it to a wider public. Szwarc also collaborated with Man Ray and editioned replicas of 10 of his objects in 1963, 64, and 1971. Though their goals were distinct, Duchamp, Man Ray, and Szwarc shared a flexible and broadly conceptual attitude towards creativity. The replication project allowed a more complete presentation of the artist's works in exhibitions and publications and served as a new creative avenue. Sold at the Galleria Szwarc in Milan and by colleague gallerists, they also were profitable ventures for artist and dealer. These joint projects and Szwarc's publications on Duchamp, Man Ray, Dada, and Surrealism established him as dealer, scholar, and promoter of artists. Szwarc was born in Alexandria, Egypt in 1924, the year the Surrealist Manifesto was published. In Alexandria, he made the acquaintance of the Egyptian Surrealists, began to correspond with André Breton, and established the publishing house and bookshop Culture and Progress. Szwarc settled in Milan in 1947 and founded another avant-garde publishing house, the Libreria Galleria Szwarc, active between 1954 and 1975, focused on Dada and Surrealism and contemporary Italian and international art. An outstanding example of creative and reciprocal relationship between artist and dealer, Duchamp and Szwarc's connection developed over the course of multiple joint ventures: cast sculptural editions produced by Galleria Szwarc, exhibitions, the printing of graphic works by the artist, and the two most significant collaborations, the editioned replicas and the preparation of Duchamp's Catalogue Raisonné by Szwarc. The editioned replicas produced by Szwarc offered Duchamp an opportunity to make a renvoi miroirique, mirrorical return, to key provocations. The usurpation of the original ready-made by the editioned replica was paradoxical, because even the term original ready-made is an oxymoron. Duchamp's unassisted ready-mades, urinal, snow shovel, or bottle rack, were chosen from mass-produced industrial items, among which there is no true original. The revolutionary value of the ready-made was precisely in dismantling the concept of the original. Just as the ready-made decontextualized the mass-produced object and stimulated a new thought for it, so too the replica stimulated a rethinking vis-à-vis the ready-made from which it stemmed. However, Duchamp was criticized when he joined forces with Schwarz. Max Ernst said that the original gesture, which gave beauty to the ready-made, was compromised. Ernst wondered if it all wasn't a new attempt to confuse, deceive, and encourage imitators. Duchamp laughingly agreed. Some also felt then, and some historians still feel now, that Duchamp compromised his artistic integrity by the commercialized dissemination of his works through the Galeria Schwarz. To represent the ready-mades more completely in the June 1964 exhibition, Schwarz decided to incorporate several of the Moderna Museet replicas, borrowing Fountain in Advance of the Broken Arm with Hidden Noise, and so on, that Linde had prepared for the 1963 exhibition at Galerie Buren. The exhibition also included proofs of the boîte en valise, as well as the boîte itself. The exhibition's elaborate catalogue, which you see here, was designed by Duchamp in collaboration with Schwarz and included essays by Hops, Linde, and Schwarz, published in Italian, French, and English side by side. Schwarz's catalogue illustrated the ready-mades with their original date, noting next to the photo credit whether it was from the Galeria Schwarz edition or a Moderna Museet replica. The lack of dating for the replicas presented the unique and editioned replicas as undifferentiated from the original ready-mades. While Schwarz listed several ready-mades in the catalogue checklist as his own edition, the catalogue images and installation photographs reveal them as Linde's Stockholm replicas. The idea to edition replicas, this is another installation shot, and you can see that the curved, the bicycle wheel with the curved fork was the uncorrected, either the uncorrected Linde version or his own replica, which was being produced because there was still a back and forth about the object. And here you see this in Advance of the Broken Arm is the Linde replica, along with others. The idea to edition replicas might well have been born out of an earlier collaboration between Schwarz and the artist on the casting in bronze of two of Duchamp's erotic objects, Objet d'Art and Chastity Wedge, which stemmed from Duchamp's still secret work, Intendent, of which we heard this morning. This work was many years later also reproduced in miniature. Here's the Intendent, and it was reproduced in miniature by Ulf Linde much later, and it was included now in Cécile Debrez's show in Pompidou. So these replicas have an afterlife, again, becoming stand-ins for the original. In 1964, to mark the 50th anniversary of the first ready-made bottle dryer, as I mentioned, Schwarz collaborated in Duchamp producing the replicas of 14 of his most important ready-mades in numbered and signed editions, 8 for sale, 2 for museum collections, 1 for Duchamp, and 1 for Schwarz. So the museum collection sets are at the Israel Museum Jerusalem and at the Galleria d'Arte Moderna in Rome. The Duchamp set is at Pompidou, and so that's some of the dissemination of the replicated ready-mades. Each of the editioned replicas was the result of rigorous research and painstaking technical processes with the aim of replicating the historical original in detail. For the 7 ready-mades that had been lost, for example, bicycle wheel here, Schwarz commissioned a professional draftsman in Milan to prepare technical drawings of the ready-mades from enlargements of old photographs of each. These detailed one-to-one drawings included measurements and indications regarding materials. Duchamp reviewed each drawing, press-proofed it, made corrections, and answered Schwarz's questions, and signed off in red pen, "OK, Marcel Duchamp." Indeed, it was an ironic twist to go back to an industrial artist for these technical drawings, someone who could have been the designer of the original urinal, bicycle wheel, etc. This process led to new objects, free of the vice of repetition that Duchamp so abhorred. Whereas the Schwarz-Linden-Hupps catalog texts did not explain the conceptual value of the editioned replicas, the technical drawings prepared in order to fabricate the editioned replicas were displayed at Schwarz's exhibition on a wall adjacent to a vitrine containing the boîte en valise, thereby revealing the replication process and the fact that the ready-mades were not originals but rather editioned replicas. The original fountain, a urinal bought by the artist in a New York plumbing supply shop, was lost after its rejection from the Society of Independent Artists exhibition in 1917 in New York. In 1938, Duchamp made a miniature papier-mâché version of the fountain for his portable museum, the boîte en valise. Duchamp used elaborate reproduction techniques that blurred the boundaries between the unique artwork and its reproduction in multiple. Ironically, the production of the miniature replicas of the ready-mades involved handcrafting the mold of an already mass-produced object in order to mass-produce it again. This process greatly resembles Schwarz's procedure in producing the editioned replicas of the ready-mades and appears to have served as a precedent for such replication processes. Sidney Janis's 1950 fountain was found, strangely enough, in a Parisian flea market and shown in the gallery's exhibition Challenge and Defy Extreme Examples by 20th Century Artists. The next replica of fountain was chosen by Ulf Linde in 1963. These urinals differed significantly in shape from the fountain that hung in 1917 in Duchamp's New York studio and was photographed by Stiglitz. Nevertheless, Duchamp gave his approval. The technical drawings Schwarz used for his edition depicted fountain from plan, front view, and section and were approved by the artist. Schwarz then had a terracotta model made as a prototype for the cast urinal. A sanitary ware manufacturer near Como, Italy, fabricated the replica urinals in glazed earthenware. They produced a special steel frame, which Schwarz later destroyed, and stopped their other production for a day to make it. They told him that they could have made 2,000 of the urinals for the price he paid for 12. The Armat 1917 inscription on the bottom of Schwarz's replica was inscribed with a stencil derived from the Stiglitz photograph and reproduced in gloss black paint. The artist signed the sculpture's underside, and a lacquered bronze plate with engraved edition details was adhered to each replica. While the Schwarz fountains are externally highly similar to the lost original, fountain expert William Camfield identified differences in contour, groove, and alignment of drain holes, which to him made it more like a sculpture than a ready-made. Indeed, the involved and lengthy process of replicating fountain is striking. Schwarz ironically returned to a traditional sculptural technique, which the original ready-made had challenged. The replicas also readdressed the idea of infra-mince, infra-thin differences between casts, a subject that had preoccupied Duchamp in preparing the miniature versions of fountain for the boîte en valise. In Milan, Duchamp signed the replicas that he had not signed in Stockholm. The 1963 replica of fountain that had been signed in Stockholm in Duchamp's absence using prefabricated block letters was now signed with enamel paint when Duchamp saw it exhibited at the Galleria Schwarz in 1964. The edition's fidelity to the originals was unprecedented among previous replicas. Through the production processes and final result, Duchamp reinterpreted his earlier gestures and explored the notion of self-contradiction. The replicas sharpened Duchamp's initial challenge to authorship, now joined with his proxy, Arturo Schwarz. Early in his artistic career, Duchamp had progressed from working in a mechanical, artistic language to the conception of the ready-made. The next logical step toward his goal to dehumanize works of art was the replication of the ready-mades. On the other hand, the limited edition replicas are highly retinal and aesthetic entities produced by traditional methods. Rather than look for similar objects, Schwarz and Duchamp decided to remake the ready-made. The replicas are hybrids between individual production and industrial object, and are therefore more tangible and less conceptual than the original ready-mades. The edition replicas readdress and sometimes contradict notions Duchamp conceived with the original ready-mades in the 1910s and 20s. The artist's return was mirarical in that in some respects the edition replicas sharpen Duchamp's original challenge, yet in others deconstruct his original concepts and decanonize them, as several ironies emerge. The editions replicate the ready-mades by infra-thin margins, and noted by the reactions of the museums owning original ready-mades that were replicated, the editions shatter notions of authorship and the unique, valuable, or radic original. So would someone like to read, to play Alfred Barr, Dear Marcel? Because I think you've heard my voice already a long time. Anyone? You have someone? Good. Katya. Dear Marcel. No? Dear Marcel, naturally we were somewhat surprised to hear from Mr. Schwarz that you had already sold to him the rights of reproduction for 3 standard stoppages and the Fresh Widow, and that this edition has already been made without any consultation with us and even without informing us. We had supposed that these 2 works bequeathed to us by Catherine Dreyer, through the courtesy of you as her executor, were unique and would remain unique. Naturally, their commercial multiplication reduces the value of the 2 original works in our collection. Alfred Barr. So this is as a reaction to Schwarz writing to MoMA in Philadelphia, asking incessant questions, details, how to make his replicas. And you can see part of the answer of Arturo Schwarz, which I brought here. As you may be aware, Mr. Ulf Linde of the Moderna Museet of Stockholm had already done a couple of years ago 1 copy of each Fresh Widow and 3 standard stoppages, without any action on your part. And this mere fact creates a precedent at the International Court of Law of The Hague, which judges such cases, would automatically invalidate any claim of the Museum of Modern Art. This mentioned, I repeat, I am delighted to have the opportunity to show my admiration for the superb collection which the Museum of Modern Art has been able to assemble, thanks to your prophetic foresight, taste, and culture. The editions replicate the ready-mades by infra-thin margins. They distance or dehumanize the making of a work of art by delegating research and execution from the artist to the dealer and then to the artisan or factory. For replication of the ready-mades, the Museum of Modern Art and the Philadelphia Museum of Art supplied plans, drawings, photos, and instructions in response to Schwarz's extensive and insistent demands. Some expressed concerns, as you saw, that the edition replicas would compromise the value of their original ready-mades. Now, just to finish that story, as compensation, the Museum of Modern Art received one of Weihnacht's Rose c'est la vie as a gift from Arturo Schwarz, and that placated their loss of monopoly over the uniqueness of their ready-mades. So, Schwarz became a proxy for Duchamp, just as the editioned replica became a substitute for the original ready-mades. Duchamp distanced himself from traditional authorship, yet retained authorship over the concept in the form of his own multiplied signature. 83 letters shed new light on Duchamp and Schwarz's joint projects and reveal the great lengths to which Schwarz went to obtain precise information and replicas visually faithful to the original. An analysis of these sources allows for a reassessment of Duchamp and Schwarz's collaborative effort and facilitates the construction of a more complete historical narrative of the commissioning and fabrication of the editioned replicas. These sources testify to Schwarz's almost fanatical dedication to these ventures and also unearth novel aspects of Duchamp's outlook on originality, authorship, and authenticity. Here we see Apollinaire enameled. I know that perfection cannot be achieved, but I would like to do as perfect a job as is humanly possible. I'm sorry to continue troubling you with details regarding the ready-mades of Duchamp I am making the replicas of, but I wanted these replicas to be as faithful as possible to the original. What I need now is that you very kindly accept to send me by airmail one of the little marble cubes contained in the cage of Why Not Sneeze. What museum would agree to that now? And here you see additional editions produced by Schwarz, dust breeding, using printing from the negative, the 1920 negative, and how the price goes up from $150 in 1964 to $10,000. That's in the price list of 1974. And El Hacho au Cru, an edition of 35, enclosed in Pierre Masseau's essay on Duchamp. These are additional editioned works produced by Galeria Schwarz, also in collaboration with Jacqueline Matisse-Monnier, the Boîte en Valise, the large glass and related works. However, of greater significance than questions of monetary value are the conceptual strategies Duchamp introduced and which continue to influence and inspire contemporary artists who have taken the relationship between original and replica as a primary focus of their artistic activity. While Duchamp was involved in curating or staging his own future reception, he did not strive to be enshrined. He was more interested in creating, quote, a new attempt to throw public opinion, to confuse minds, to deceive admirers, to encourage his imitators by his bad example. The editioned replicas shift attention away from the original objects, emphasizing their function as a dynamic, ever-evolving conceptual device, an ongoing challenge and stimulation for future creativity. I would like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to a number of people with whom I consulted on their roles in the story of replication. Arturo Schwarz, Jacqueline Matisse-Monnier, Ulf Linde, Jean-Jacques Lebel, Daniel Spoeri, Nicholas Ekstrom, and Timothy Shipp. I've also deeply benefited from the resources in the archives of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, the Bibliothèque Kandinsky at the Centre Pompidou, the Ekstrom Gallery, the Indiana University Art Museum, and the National Gallery of Australia. My great appreciation goes to the staff of these archives who facilitated my research, and I would like to take this opportunity to encourage us to join together the Israel Museum and the Moderna Museet and the Schwerin Center in Philadelphia and MoMA and Pompidou to source together to create an exhibition that deals with the question of the replica, because I think it could be very interesting to show the different replicas side by side and in that way surface the question of the replica and its problematics. Thank you very much.